Mandating the use of all three tyre compounds in an F1 race is something that's been chucked about for a while now and even tried out a couple of times, but as of late it's become something that's legitimately on the table for permanent implementation. And honestly, it's a horrible idea, and here's why. Kia ora, I'm Kimmy, I talk F1 in the world's second worst accent, and if Monaco 2025 was something of a test case for the idea of a mandatory two-stop Grand Prix, then you'd be forgiven for scratching your head a bit when reports started coming out saying this might become the norm for Formula One moving forward. Now, before I get into why I think this is not good for the sport, first let's get the semantics out of the way and talk about exactly how this conversation has come up again. And I do apologise for my slightly even more nasal than usual voice, I am still getting over the sickness. Now, obviously requiring teams to use three compounds of tyre or change their tyres twice in a Grand Prix doesn't necessarily mean two pit stops, as tyres can be changed under a red flag and are still considered part of the allocation. This is for a variety of reasons, but particularly for safety in instances where cars may have suffered punctures due to debris or being involved in an incident, as well as a certain amount of fairness when you consider mid-race red flags will often come around someone's pit window and it's kind of uncool to make a driver do a standing restart or even a rolling one on 25-lap-old medium tyres and then immediately have to pit at the end of the lap. Yeah, it sucks for those who came in earlier and effectively lost a pit stop to everyone else, but nuance is a thing and nothing's perfect, especially in a sport as complicated as Formula One. So semantics around the number of tyre changes versus actual pit stops covered, where exactly did this report come from? For once, it's an actual proper source. The FIA has stated that the topic of pit stops and the quantity of tyre compounds used during Grand Prix is on the agenda for this week's Sporting Advisory Committee. Will also be discussed with the F1 Commission. According to some reports, including from motorsport.com, Liberty Media as well as some teams are on board with at least exploring the idea further. It was also brought up at the drivers' briefing in Mexico, however exactly what the sentiments of the drivers are around it, well, it's not clear. Now, Pirelli's Mario Sola has also suggested that were a two-stop mandated, then perhaps removing the requirement to use all three compounds may possibly open up an opportunity for more strategic variations. However, he also made the point that when you give teams the data on tyre compounds and parameters to work within, they often converge on the same solutions in their simulations. Which makes total sense because at the end of the day, it's science, engineering, and statistics. What's the most likely outcome based on all these variables? That dictates the prime strategy. So why do I think this won't work? Now, obviously, Monaco is a race to point at, although in fairness, that's probably not the best test case due to it being, well, Monaco and a circuit where it's incredibly easy to back up the pack with a slower car and create a pit stop gap. Daniel Ricciardo famously won that race in 2018 without a functioning MGU-K. Were that same theory applied to, say, Sakir or Austin or Sao Paulo, I'm sure the outcome would have been quite different, and the car that was a cork in the bottle in Monaco would become a sitting duck at one of the more overtake favourable circuits. So the issue I don't think is really around seeing repeats of what we saw happen in the one race this year where the two-stop rule was tested. It's more about how mandating two stops, and in particular three different compounds, removes a key part of the strategic intrigue of a Grand Prix and is just putting a temporary tyre plug in a much bigger problem. And look, I could talk about the expectations of a modern audience to see banger races week in, week out, the short memories of many long-term fans, and how we got to this point of extremely wide, extremely long cars that have a wheelbase bigger than my lumbering old Toyota Hilux. But while all that's tangential, it's probably 15 minutes of nuance that I need to spend a couple of weeks really considering my thoughts about and researching rather than relying on my own extremely iffy memory. I am rapidly approaching middle age and this just does not work like it used to. Now, the bigger problem I'm talking about is the constant friction between Pirelli and the teams and the drivers. Competitors, whether they be in the car or out of it, will criticise both a race with basically no deg, limiting the opportunity for strategic variation and tyre offsets, and bemoan finishing where they started, or they'll complain about the tyres being too far down the range or suffering too much overheating and needing to put in more effort into tyre management rather than maximising the rubber. Now, a lot of this also comes down to track characteristics and conditions, as well as each individual car and driver's ability to get the most out of each compound. Does your car eat tyres while running in the dirty air of other cars like the Ferrari and Haas circa 2023? Is your driver still learning to manage each stint because they're inexperienced like Oscar Piastri was in his first couple of seasons? Have you misjudged the track surface? This is all part of how a team works together to get the most out of what they're given, and the feedback from the teams, whether that's in race data from previous years or from simulations, is part of how Pirelli chooses their tyre selections. The problem is, it feels like they can just never win, and we can make jokes about Pirelli until the cows come home. Lord knows I've certainly done this, but they really are often stuck between a rock and a hard place. The rock being tyres that drivers can lean on for more than 5 or 6 laps, the hard place being tyres that open up a realistic opportunity for more than just a one-stop strategy. Am I advocating for a return to tyre wars? No, not necessarily, although having said that, I do absolutely believe that a return to 2 manufacturers would be better for the sport than mandating 2 stops, however that would look. Now, I touched on this in my last video, but making changes to tyre requirements or options has been criticised by some as creating kind of manufactured outcomes and artificiality within the sport, which, I don't buy that. At the end of the day, all sporting rules are constructs. There is no inherent right or wrong in how a governing body chooses to dictate them, in most instances anyway, because they're made up and it's their prerogative to adapt them as they see fit. Rules change in sports all the time. Just this year, a number of variations were made to the World Rugby rules to enable safer, more efficient matches. Even within F1, the tyre rules have changed many times over the years. It wasn't that long ago that any driver who reached Q3 was required to use the same set of tyres they qualified on to start the Grand Prix, which effectively gave anyone who started in the top 10 a manufactured tyre offset penalty against those toward the back. Going back to that, in my opinion, is more preferable than requiring 2 stops. Look at Qatar in 2023, where the harsh pyramid curbs were deemed such a hazard to the longevity of the tyres that, again, a 2-stop race was mandatory. Now sure, like Monaco's dud of a Sunday this year, that was a combination of factors that caused such severe outcomes. The requirement to do 2 stops meant drivers were pumping in laps during the Grand Prix that were comparable to their qualifying times on a circuit that's very physically demanding at a time of the year where the heat and humidity were pretty extreme. This meant some pretty horrible stories and footage of drivers dealing with the, in hindsight, not so surprising consequences. So would the rule have to be rescinded for other Grand Prix where this is a factor? Singapore, for example, any race where a heat hazard is declared. Mexico, because of the altitude. On some tracks, would it cause even more frustration for drivers because they know the tyres have it in them to go at quali pace, but their fuel and battery levels force them to lift and coast. If everyone's doing that, the likelihood of overtakes at all just keeps getting slimmer. So not only does a requirement for a 2-stop race effectively remove any strategic intrigue at all, because let's be real, nobody's going to start thinking about doing 3 stops with the current compounds and lack of refueling. To be clear, I am absolutely not advocating bringing back mid-race refuels, as well as bring into question the ability for cars to make it to the end without extreme fuel and battery management, but it also raises some concerns about driver welfare. Yeah, that thing so many people love to poo-poo and throw about terms like gladiators and superheroes, which long-term viewers will know sets my teeth on edge and causes my eyes to roll so far back in my head that it's a miracle my ocular muscles are still functioning. No, in my opinion, the solution here is the opposite to that one proposed. Allow teams to complete a race on a single set of tyres if they so wish. Completely open up all of the options, but utilise the concepts that have already been used in 2025. Bringing a step softer in compounds to races that previously have been nailed on 1 stops might not consistently have worked in the Grand Prix, but it has had an additional benefit of forcing some teams into varying their tyre selections for qualifying, which has honestly been pretty darn fascinating. Extend that idea everywhere. Maybe even develop a new, even softer C6 and shuffle everything further down the range. Maybe bring back the C0 as an extreme hard option that's a bogey for some high deg, high wear circuits that tempt some teams into compromising ride height to avoid falling afoul of plank wear rules so they can run a zero-stop race. Skipping a step? Well, it didn't work in Spa where everyone started on the intermediates because of the pretty normal conditions for Belgium, or in Austin where the deg was non-existent, but it created an incredibly exciting event in Mexico. Maybe consider that for at least half of the races next year and really pick and choose which ones it will be most effective for. Now, those in the know are obviously far more aware of how the new regulations are expected to affect tyre wear than those of us who do office chair commentary. The new 50-50 hybrid split will change the power delivery and the weight distribution, and those new cars will need to be driven slightly differently. But to what extreme? Who knows? The new aerodynamic regulations will change how airflow affects tyre wear, and teams can simulate that on a computer or in the wind tunnel forever if they had the allocation, but they won't know how it works in the real world until they've got those aero rakes attached and downloaded the onboard data come that first closed testing session in January. However it all shakes out, I genuinely hope that this idea of mandating 2 stops is quashed pretty quick, because I don't see how it will bring any benefit to the sport at all. Thanks so much for watching to the end. Thanks to my patrons for your continued support. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more from me. I talk a disproportionate amount about tyres, and I'm only kind of kidding. I'll see you on Thursday for my 3 burning questions for the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. Ka kite.